Okay, we're back again with another review of an adventure game book, and one that's got some particular significance to me. Now, you may have noticed if you've been following these reviews that there's one particular series I haven't done any reviews of, and that's because I simply didn't have any of them in my collection at that point. But I've changed that! Oh yes, I have gone out of my way to actually go and find the very first adventure game book I ever read. The Horror of High Ridge, which is from the Choose Your Own Adventure series. Now, this is not my original copy. I have actually had to go out of my way by going to Amazon to actually find this. And it turns out that there's actually entire dedicated sellers that must be hoarding these sort of books. And some are actually going for quite reasonable prices as well. But yeah, I finally have a copy of this book now. After so many years. I think last time I actually had a copy of this was probably about 20 odd years ago. 25 years ago, maybe. And some of you, if you're younger than that, you're thinking, really? Was there stuff happening more than 25 years ago before I was alive? Of course there was. It's called The History of Humanity. Look it up sometime. But anywho, let's get on track here. This is Choose Your Own Adventure. You're the star of the story. Choose from 27 possible endings. The Horror of High Ridge by Julius Goodman, with illustrations by Paul Granger. And I quite like this. This was my introduction. This was my gateway into adventure game books. That's you in the middle. That's Ricardo, that's Lisa. And these are two ghosts, as you might be able to tell from the colouring. You've got the moon, you've got a tomahawk, you've got a great big Bowie knife maybe, and you've got the little township of High Ridge there. Ghost of a Native American Indian, and a prospector. Now, these books are relatively slim compared to, say, a fighting fantasy book. Just look at them in comparison. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the lesser of these particular kind of books. They're just written in a very different way. You don't have any life points, skill points, stamina, and so on and so forth, luck points and so on. You don't get into battles where you have to roll dice and so on and so forth. You don't really have equipment, although some situations do call for you to use the objects that are nearby. It's a very much more simplified, stripped down story in some regards, a very stripped down system, so to speak. Let's just take a look at the back here. What is the horrible secret of High Ridge? You and your friends are spending the summer in your great uncle's cabin in the mountain town of High Ridge. An old legend say that ghosts lurk everywhere and murder unsuspecting victims. You don't believe it, until an arrow bursts through the window, whizzes past your head, thuds into the wall, then disappears. If you decide you'll be safer, if you stay inside the cabin, turn to page 12. If you decide to run to your jeep and get out of town, turn to page 8. Be careful. High Ridge is full of danger. You might end up trapped inside a burning building or hurtling off a cliff. If you're lucky, you might become a town hero. What happens next in the story? It all depends on the choices you make. How does the story end? Only you can find out. And the best part is that you can keep reading and rereading until you have had not one, but many incredible, daring experiences. So yeah, you might have noticed, as I said earlier, 27 possible endings. Not all are good. Let's just take a look at what we've got here. Now, this basically tells you this is number 27, so it does confirm here 26 books in the series already. 2 new titles every other month, only 95p each. Now, I bought this for something like £2.70 off Amazon.co.uk, which does go to show that it has somewhat appreciated in value. Apparently, some of the original fighting fantasy books can go for double-digit figures, something like 40-50 quid, sometimes even more in some cases in the case of the really rare books. That's a subject for another time though, but you can tell just how old the book is from the quality of the pages. But this particular book, I have heard some horror stories about buying online where the books just come in really terrible shape. I mean, you can see straight off that this has been around the block a few times. It's a little torn and damaged in places, but that's not the pages that really matter, really, is it? But some books are listed as in good condition, and the people that get them are actually finding that the books aren't in good condition. They're literally falling apart, or have already fallen apart, because the spines are broken, the pages are loosened, falling out, and so on and so forth. And obviously they've had to take that up with the sellers and the websites that they bought it from. But yeah, we can see quite a few of the things here. We've got a little bit of the artwork here. It's set in modern times, so this would be set in the 80s, but your character apparently quite likes the old-timey aesthetic, so there's no electricity in the cabin. It's just all oil camp lights and stuff like that. There was actually, according to this ad here, Choose Your Own Adventure and Skylark series. Read on and become the sort of your very own story. And the Skylark series was something I've completely forgotten about, and I've never actually read myself, but it's meant for younger readers. So they obviously had their own spin-off series. And there are people who obviously trade these books, and they're all obviously a dedicated fan base out there. They're all collections of the books. I think they do have some either brand new novels and box sets, or I say novels, I mean game books. I think they do either have some new game books as a box set or collections of reissued box sets. I'm not entirely sure, I'd have to double check that at some point. But this was first published back in 1984. In fact, it had two printings, one in March and one in August of 1984. Will the camera pick that up? Hopefully. But there you go, so yeah. Trademark of Bantam Books Inc., registered in US Patent and Trademark Office and elsewhere. The original conception of Edward Packard, who did not write this particular book, but he's the person credited with this series. So, as we can see here, Old Style Mining Lamp, a good book, and an arrow that's just literally thudded into the wall. Warning! Do not read this book straight through from beginning to end. These pages contain many different adventures you have in a little town called High Ridge. From time to time, as you read along, you will be asked to make a choice. Your choice may lead to success or disaster. The adventures you take are a result of your choices. You are responsible because you choose. After you make a choice, follow the instructions to see what happens to you next. Think carefully before you make a move. In this ghostly battle for revenge, any choice might be your last. Will you save yourself from the horror of High Ridge, or will you be trapped forever? It all depends on you. Good luck. And here we go to page 1. Now this is page 1 because quite literally it's pages. You turn the pages. Unlike Fighting Fantasy where you're going from paragraph to paragraph, it's page to page. So arguably you get more information per page than you do per paragraph in a Fighting Fantasy book. That obviously depends on what's actually written on the page, because there will be some cases where there's relatively little written on the page itself, although so far all of these pages have quite a substantial amount. But there you see, just a little less than half a page of text on page 10. Anywho, starting at the beginning here, we have you. Yes, that's you. Quite youthful looking. Sitting in a chair with a lamp reading a book. Probably the same lamp and same book that was shown in the warning page there, although a different chair. And you're not there. You are standing at the window of your cabin looking out onto the street. The waning moon shines quietly over High Ridge. It reflects on the frost beginning to form, giving each building of the small mountain town a glowing outline. Sounds quite picturesque. Earlier that evening, you said goodnight to your friends, Ricardo and Lisa, who have been spending the summer with you, searching for your great-uncle's buried fortune. Then you settled down into your favourite parlour chair with an obscure volume of High Ridge history. You hoped this book would give you some clues to the whereabouts of the fortune, and after a few hours, you dozed off. Then a sound outside you startled you awake. You jumped to the windows to look out. At first, you heard nothing. You're beginning to wonder if you imagined it. Then the sound that woke you, a moaning, scarier than any sound you have ever heard, begins again. Turn to page 2. No choice there, you don't get to choose to go back to bed or anything. And I've just accidentally turned to page 4, but never mind. I don't like this, you say to yourself, thinking of the history of High Ridge. You've just read that 100 years ago, and again 50 years ago, something happened in High Ridge so horrible that most people won't talk about it. And the accounts of those who do are very different. The links between both incidents are horrible moans and the disappearances of ghastly deaths of town residents. You hop back into your chair and pull the blanket over your head. Just as your pounding heart starts to normal, you're startled by a nearby scream. You whip off the blanket. It's Lisa! The screaming stops, Lisa laughs with relief. Oh, it's you with the blanket over your head. I thought you were a ghost. I woke up and I heard a noise. She points to your book, where it landed on the floor where you jumped up. Ricardo comes running in. What's going on? I heard screaming. Turn to the next page. Then the moaning starts again. Lisa and Ricardo run to the windows. What's that? They shout together. I heard it a minute ago. I don't know what it is, but I don't like it. Let's go and find out what it is, suggests Ricardo. Are you crazy? Cries Lisa. Listen to it. It's scary. Well, sure it is. That's what makes it fun. I say let's leave the cabin and see what it is. Not me, says Lisa. I don't want to go tramping around in the dark looking for whatever is making that horrible sound. Both of them turn to look at you. Hold it, you two. Before we make a decision, I have to tell you what I've been reading. Reading? Lisa asks. Yeah, what is this? A book report? Ricardo asks. No, wait, you say, a little angrily. Well, I should read that a little differently, shouldn't I? No, wait, you say, a little angrily. Well, maybe that was too much anger. This is important. I've been reading this book, High Ridge, an oral history. It's mostly a lot of ghost stories told by old timers. Some of the ghosts are Indians, some are prospectors. They founded this town, remember? So what? Quiet, Ricardo. Go on, I want to hear more. And that is where we shall stop for now. Because after that you get an actual decision. I'm just going to skim through it because I like to show the art off on these things, as you may have noticed with these particular videos. And I'm already at the 11-minute mark. Good God. So here we are. There's you, Ricardo and Lisa, scared by an arrow that comes crashing through the window, and so on and so forth. The pictures are actually fairly well spaced out. Here we see you crawling towards the same window, and then we see a prospector, an Indian, Native American, whatever the proper term is by today's standards, of course. They're calling them Indians because at the time they were still referred to quite largely by the term Indian. I don't think the term Native American came until a couple of years after this book was published, or if it was, then it wasn't something I was aware of, but give me a break, it was 1984. But they're teeing off, they're squaring off, they're about to try to slash each other to bits, or hack each other to bits, even though they're ghosts and therefore can't die again. Or can they? Can ghosts actually die? And then we see you being terrified, just like you see on the back there. So the art does get recycled a bit, but that's fine. Talking to the ghost of an Indian. And the ghost of an Indian with a bow and arrow. Going to shoot into the building. Looks like somebody took a fall. Is that supposed to be wired up? Possibly. But there you go. Classic sort of position of an old church in a western town. A western frontier town. Some sort of gold mining type town where everybody would be gathering on Sunday to worship, supposedly. Or at least be given a good talking to by the local priest. I keep managing to bash the camera somehow. I'm probably standing just a little too close to it. So I do apologise for the rattling that you see sometimes. Oh, here we have one of the bad endings. And this is one of the things that really helps stand out with this particular book. This is one of the things that sort of set the tone for me. This whole book is basically a horror story. And there are lots of ways to die quite horribly in this book. This is one of them. All of you getting shot to death on your jeep by presumably the ghosts of the prospectors. But this did basically set the scene for me. I mean, here's another one. It gets pretty horrific from here on in. It's another one of the endings. You've got yourself tied to whatever that is, a great big post, and I'm not sure if that's actually a ghost or not, because it's a fairly solid looking character in this case, but that's a red hot poker. They can't be up to anything good with that. But yeah, that's very much set the scene for me. Oh, we've got a dead head, decapitated dead head. The only kind of dead head to have. Well, the only kind of decapitated head to have, an actual dead one, and a very psychotically happy looking Indian there. But this definitely set the scene for me, because this was the very first book of this series that I read. It set the tone. I was expecting all of them to be like that. Now, there's actually a good reason why you're smashing into that particular display there. It's because you need that tomahawk, and that comes in very important in at least one of the endings here. And then Ricardo's literally found you lot digging your own grave. And then you and Lisa get dragged off to your doom and one of the bad endings there. And this was, again, one of the things that set the scene for me. This sort of scene here, this sort of death, basically made me think that the entire series must be like this, must be some sort of horror stories. So every time I went looking for these books, I never actually owned any others but this one. I went off to the local library, I went off to other libraries that were nearby to basically borrow as many of the books that they would allow you to, and just read all of them that I could. So I've never actually collected these books, but I have read through a good deal of them. Couldn't possibly tell you now which ones I've read because that was over 25 years ago, I'm afraid. And yes, as you can imagine, that's a bad ending there. But I always enjoyed them, it's just none of them were horror books like this. This was the exception, so this really coloured my preconception. So perhaps I didn't actually enjoy the others as much as I did this one, because they weren't giving me the same sort of thrill. When I got onto things like Fighting Fantasy and other similar books, whether they had, you know, the same sort of basic stripped down system that this did, or the more complicated systems like this, generally the other books that I read, which I only discovered by chance through having read these first, the other books always tended to be a bit more involved, shall we say, a bit more graphic, a bit more up my alley, so to speak, in that regard. I've just turned 2 pages there, and I've actually just realised I've completely negated to talk about this picture, which is basically a Native American in it, in some kind of fur, I would assume, some sort of fur wrapping, silhouetted by the moon. Quite a nice picture. I mean, a lot of the artwork does actually cover the entirety of the page, whereas Fighting Fantasy, there's generally a border of some sort. Obviously it's down to yourself what you prefer, but I do like how they managed to make use of the full page here. There's probably more of the original art than what we're seeing there, but they've just gone and zoomed in on the most important bit. This is one of the bad endings. That's you, that is, falling off a cliff top onto a road. Yes, painful. And you'll notice that whenever the moon is shown, it's always a full moon. But there's that tomahawk I mentioned earlier. And I think, are we near the end of the book? Are we out of pictures? Yeah, there you are with the tomahawk again. And there's you and your friends and all the ghosts doing something on page 110. But it's not quite over yet. There's at least one more picture. Some man running away crying, as you might expect. And a whole load of very angry prospectors. Yeehaw! Okay, that's cowboys technically, but never mind. It doesn't actually ever mention whereabouts in the states you're supposed to be in as far as this book is concerned, but you know, it's obviously prospecting country. You're obviously doing something somewhere that involves prospecting, so anywhere in the Wild West basically, that's where you can imagine this being. Probably Death Valley, Arizona, the Grand Canyon, any sort of place along that sort of line. And yes, some of those places probably weren't actually prospecting places. I don't personally have that kind of knowledge to say that they were or weren't, but they probably were, or those locations have been used as settings for various cowboy movies over the last century or so. But yeah, it is still all the same, even though it is the exception to the rule as far as Choose Your Own Adventure is concerned. It's still very much worth a read. If you can get a hold of a copy, I heartily recommend it. I mean, it's a whole reason that I decided to get this. And because I found that the prices for these are actually quite reasonable, I have decided to actually go and start collecting these for a little while. Give Fighting Fantasy a little bit of a rest. I do still have a couple of more reviews on those to come. But I am going to start looking at collecting these. And what I am proposing at some point, for my next video, a Let's Read of the horror of High Ridge. See you then.